Hey everybody, it's the Mad Master here. I'm just doing a quick video before I log into my workstation at my home. I just wanted to have a little, or make a little note about this straw man that's being pushed by many on the left as far as people that are supporting the convoy or opposing Trudeau's moves against the convoy, which, you can say that there are people on the left that are calling the stuff out that is going on with Trudeau, even if they don't support the measure, they don't support the goals of the convoy or whatnot, the emergency powers. So a lot on the left are saying, well, it's being astroturfed by this right wing groups. And I just wanted to remind people that there were known communists that were pushing some of the civil rights protests back in the day. It's like, well, if you look at the funding, maybe the American Communist Party might be pushing this or that, movement that Martin Luther King might have appeared at or something, or, there might, and, 20 years ago, there might have been like Islamist groups pushing or funding some of the Iraq war protests. I mean, the ideology or the goals of a stated protest is and your support of it is different than who is funding it necessarily. And there was a lot of people funding, there's been a lot of people funding the convoy. Now I want to put aside another thought I had about this, because what happened with regards to the Cold War is that oftentimes, this is what Chomsky used to talk about in his books. Pardon my shaky cam. I'm just kind of had some coffee and I'm holding the phone instead of having it in my little selfie stick thing that I use. But with regards to communism and the Cold War, what would happen is the United States imperialism, which is a real thing, as well as Soviet imperialism, a third world country would have no choice on who to go to, and they would want to go more independently. This is what this is a fault of a lot of people. This happened a lot in South and Central America more than anything. I'm going to have to say there was a substantive difference between the way that leftist regimes operated in South and Central America, just from my study of history and how they operated around the world. Asia seeming the most genocidal, Eastern Europe kind of in between as far as human rights and everything, and the South and Central America definitely had more of a legitimate grievance and reason for going to leftism. But leftism, what would happen is these parties would not have any support from anybody, and they were kind of forced to look to. They could have gone the third way, like what's his name? I'm trying to think of the name. Some of the third way people. Now I'm not talking about fascism. I'm talking about like the people, the non-aligned countries. With some of those people, and that would have been a lot more difficult economically. So they went. Sometime it just kind of ended up, because of the way the propaganda worked and everything. They went to the Soviet Union because they at least the promise would be that they would be more independent of imperialism and all that. So, and that the people would have more support, instead of being basically slaves to corporations from the United States and the West. So this is what happened, and you can argue and debate the history of these countries, whether or not they accomplished these things or not, or if they were authoritarian or not. I mean, obviously Cuba is very authoritarian, and Venezuela was a failure, in a lot of ways too, as far as that goes. So that could be argued, but the reasoning initially behind that is because they were not, they had nowhere else to go as far as supporting their aims of their revolutions. And then obviously more actual leftists, like more actual communists, I should say, Marxist Leninists, infiltrated their parties, and then it's all history from there, and that's the way it went. what I'm saying is that their initial goals probably were very pure, and that's why they had to go to these communist governments for support or help, because they were forced to, because they had no other choice with regards to what are their goals for their people. And of course, if there was some kind of huge superpower that was more a democratic socialist or socially democratic and wouldn't want to push like the really extreme Marxist Leninism on these countries, that would have been another option. But it was kind of a confluence of things that happened with regards to that. So what I'm trying to say with this, and this is a comparison to this, is that the people that are questioning the narratives of World Health, or not World Health, of the World Economic Forum and the globalists, or the people trying to push these agendas, the digital currency, the social credit, and all this stuff, starting from the V passports. I'm just going to say V. That was the infrastructure for what's going to come. As far as what they were trying to do, of course, that's been a failure on many ends, because of what has happened with some of the variants and stuff. But of course, it could be a crash or something where they do try to roll out the digital currency and the digital ID and all that. So this is the right wing has been assigned this ideological, line in the sand, or no, that's not the right term, but this ideological position in regards to all the narratives that are being pushed, because the corporatist neoliberal establishment is very aligned with the globalization and the globalist goals. So you have, and I've talked about this before, you have the right wing has been aligned with this whole thing. Just like 20 years ago, there could have been a huge amount of right wingers, and obviously there were libertarians that were against what was going on with the neocons. But the fact of the matter is that the right wing had aligned themselves with those goals, rightly or wrongly, if they even fit what a lot of people, like a lot of libertarians would say later, that Bush was no conservative. The deficit spending and all that, he was a lot worse than he was not about actually fiscal responsibility or anything conservatives usually espouse. So it just happened to be that this alignment happened with regards to the right being the neocons, and it was kind of a historical precedent, because Republicans were always, at least after a certain point, of course this is historically inaccurate if you actually look at the history that has happened with regards to wars and the United States and imperialism. It actually usually is, the initial steps oftentimes are Democratic presidents, or Eisenhower. Okay, he was a Republican, and he had the first advisors in Vietnam, but JFK escalated it, and then Lyndon Johnson escalated it even more. So Democrats are actually oftentimes the more stealth-like warmongers than the Republicans. But the Republicans have been aligned, rightly or wrongly, with hawkishness over the last 50 years and before the Iraq War. So they were the ones that were supporting it and doing the propaganda and stuff. So somehow, over the last 5 years, with regards to the Trump phenomenon and the increased conglomeratization of big tech, big media, these world organizations, top-down, authoritarian, and this happened because of neoliberalism and Clinton and the DLC, or the DCCC, all these like organizations that tried to push the Democratic Party rightward in the 80s and 90s. So this got aligned with what was happening with these agendas, and with the virus narrative, it kind of created the backdrop from where the right wing would be the ones pushing back against all these narratives. And it's a very complicated, convoluted history with regards to this and how it really unfolded. But my point is, right wing or left wing doesn't really matter who is funding these protests. And saying that they're race, I mean, I don't know. I haven't done the research completely as far as who's funding these convoy protests, but the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter to me because the ideological goals of this protest, to me, are pure. Even if the people pushing the agenda are on this side of this or whatever, it's just like, would I not support civil rights protests just because the American Communist Party, which is a lot of glowies and feds even by then, were pushing those goals? Would I not support protesting the Iraq War because some terrorist linked Islamist group gave like half the money to a particular protest or something? No, of course not. Because the result of the protest, I'm just looking at my schedule today, excuse me, and the result of the protest, the ideological reasoning behind it, to me is enough to support that goal. And like I said, there's a lot of people make strange political bedfellows over the years. It's like, I think the real left, what I call the real left, is going to be more on board with fighting against this kind of tyranny over the next upcoming months. I mean, Hardlens Media, Vanguard, Ilhan Omar, Jimmy Dore, of course Jimmy Dore, because he's a conspiracy theorist. No. All these people are aligning themselves with this as far as on the left, Greenwald, Taibbi, even if they don't support the actual protest, that the goals of that, sometimes they definitely are saying what Trudeau is doing is very authoritarian. And, the ACLU for Canada is going against Trudeau now, their version of the ACLU. So so maybe there were some far right groups that funded the protest, but that's just the positioning that is happening with these narratives, because somehow over the years they're pushed into this position, they're pushed into these camps regardless of what is happening. So just like there may have been many Republicans against the Iraq War and said that actually there was, what was his name, from Reagan's administration, that wrote for Counterpunch, has said even Reagan would not have done what Bush was doing at the time, even though Reagan definitely had problems. But the fact of the matter is that the neocons were a different breed of right wing to some of these people, and you can argue against the right wing, of course, as warmongers and all that stuff through history. That's just a perception that has been displayed, even though, like I said, the Democrats and the left, or not the left, the liberals. Left and liberal are two different things, according, if you look into the history of stuff. I don't mean classical liberal and neoliberal. I mean liberals versus, there's all sorts of terms. Why do we even go there? It's just like, it's stupid, because as Majid Nawaz says in the latest Joe Rogan podcast, it's up versus down. It's not left versus right. But just like with the Iraq War, being a Republican-supported thing, at the time at least, the Republicans, were all in lockstep. So if you were part of the Republicans or part of the right back then, you were seen as as an outcast or a heretic if you went against that narrative, even if they're, partially right about Bush being an exception to the rule as far as to be on the right. And the same thing goes for the left today with regards to a lot of what Trudeau is doing, or some of these governments and these emergency powers, and with the virus narratives, because a lot of these things are traditionally not left wing necessarily, as far as quashing people's rights, I mean, it depends on what you consider left wing. I would say they're not liberal, at least in the least. Obviously, Marxist Leninist governments were authoritarian and quashed people's rights. There's no doubt about that. But with regards to this, from my perspective, as far as how I was brought up on the left, this is not representative of what I believe is the ideology of what is supposed to be happening. Because what I was, as far as my formative years, there was the anti-WTO protests and the Iraq War and 9/11, the war on terror, and that was what the left were against 20 years ago. And I'm, like Jon Stewart and a few others were of the age, or were of the beliefs that were perpetuated back then on the left. So that's why we're against a lot of what's going on with the censorship and the narratives that are being pushed, and we're trying to investigate that and see what is actually happening with all this and what the end goals are. So I'd actually, on that note, I recommend listen to the latest Joe Rogan with well, not the latest one, but the one with Majid Nawaz, I believe that's how to pronounce his name. So he really breaks down what this is all about the last 2 years, and that's my opinion. I could be wrong, I could be crazy. If I'm crazy, then like Alexander Todd might think my teeth suck, or I'm, what a fat or whatever, or I'm just crazy conspiracy, right-wing conspiracy theorist, libertarian, or whatever the hell he called me, or Nazi or whatever. I come from Jewish ancestry, whatever people, these trolls say, or people on Facebook that just think I'm nuts. If I want to be nuts. I hope I'm nuts. I hope I'm insanely paranoid, and all this shit is bullshit, and we'll just go back to normal and nothing will happen. No crisis that push the digital currency or IDs or whatever they're trying to do. I hope that's all bullshit. I hope I'm wrong. This is, I like to be right about a lot of stuff. Like when I talk about metal, I'm like, yeah, I'm right about metal, man. New metal sucks, man. I'm right about all that, but my ego is pushed aside for this whole thing. I hope I'm completely wrong, but the whole point is that the right wing has been part of this narrative, this anti-narrative this time. They switched roles. So the left wing 20 years ago was against what these global institutions, some of these global institutions and some of these, power-hungry authoritarian maniacs on the global stage were going for. They were for that. This time, or the left wing, I should say, the left wing was against all that stuff. This time it's the right wing, but there are a few left wing people on the left that are kind of remembering what it was all about 20 years ago, like me. That's why when the new normal thing came about, I was like, that sounds like we'll never be the same again, coming up about 20 years, or not 20 years, 2 years of doing that video, because the linguistics were very psyopish. They seemed like they were trying to push an agenda early on with the virus narrative. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong. I could just be paranoid, but the linguistics were very troubling. If they would have said, "Oh, well, we might have to make some temporary sacrifices to get back to normal," in those articles, then I would have been like, "Oh, okay." And I think more people would have been like, okay, well, we don't know how long, but we have to do this. We're sorry. None of the articles were like that. All the articles were like, this is the new normal. People won't shake hands again now in the future. And it's like, okay, why are you saying this? What is this about? What is your goal and intent with these articles? And these people are, talk about astroturfing. Some of these people are, feds or linked to all sorts of agencies and stuff, and alphabet agencies. Some of these are journalists and stuff. It's been exposed. Operation Mockingbird, all this stuff. But it doesn't even matter. The editorial board might, say, oh, let's do an article where it says this, because they know someone or they're all linked together. It's not some kind of conspiracy necessarily. It's just the collective consciousness of these people are going into this goal, this one goal or one narrative that they're trying to push. But yeah, that was the narrative that worried me from the beginning. 2 years ago, I almost said 20 again, but And that's why I've been pushing back all along, because I thought there was something fishy about that, you know? Like I said, if they would have been saying we have to make temporary sacrifices to fight this virus, blah, 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 this is not, we will get back to normal one day. But like I said in one of my videos, like from 2020, there were articles that said we'll never be back to normal, all this stuff. It's like, why would they do this unless they're preparing us for something worse or different, a new system or whatever? Maybe they're wrong. Maybe they were full of shit. Maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I am. But, anyways, back to the original purpose of this video. It's getting kind of late because I have to start work. By the way, that's all I got to say about this job. So if there was a narrative that said, okay, we know it sucks, we got to make these temporary sacrifices to get back to normal. We will get back to normal once there's the V, or once there's a good treatment or whatever. And they would have said that from the beginning, I would have been more trusting of the media and the narrative. That kind of stuff that came out was so weird and bizarre. So it just screamed psyop to me right away, because I know 9/11. After that, all the narratives that were pushed, and that reminded me of that. It just did. We'll never be the same again. This unprecedented act of terror. And they were saying all this stuff, and like, saying in the Bin Laden cave shit, like with the fortress, like the G.I. Joe Cobra play set kind of thing, with the picture on Time Magazine and Rumsfeld. And I can never trust the media again after that. So of course I question these narratives. I have PTSD from 9/11, the Iraq War on terror. So that's why I question the whole thing, because it seems so eerily similar to the narratives we were being pushed. The divisiveness too, like, don't trust your neighbor, they might be a terrorist, or, invisible carrier of the virus, they're terrible, deplorable people who don't want to wear a mask. Oh my God, they're murderers. Yeah, tell that to Liana Wen, now about, about the cloth masks or whatever. Fucking is ridiculous. So my whole point is that through history and time, protests have been funded by all sorts of, people trying to be opportunistic or astroturf things, but that does not mean that you cannot support the end goals or the things that they're pushing. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's like, well, politics makes strange bad fellows at times. Maybe there are some like white supremacist groups that are funding the convoy, or there might have been one or something like that was linked to something, but I mean, are you going to say that a Maoist group supporting BLM is any less problematic? They want people to live under Maoism, which is something that killed tens of millions of people, but they're pushing against police brutality for whatever their goals are. That doesn't mean that you can't support BLM because they're a bunch of fucking, grifters that are astroturfing it necessarily, or that you can't support this or that protest. So fuck the people that are trying to muddy the waters about the protests, about the, convoy. I don't care one bit, because they're the ones that pushed us into this position, much like the U.S. pushed these, like South American countries into the arms of the Soviet Union by what they did. And either way, it's wrong. Either one is wrong, the Soviet Union or the United States, with regards to that, right? But the United States were the ones doing it, and it's this neoliberal corporatist agenda, world, dare I say, globalist agenda that is pushing people that are opposed to the narratives being pushed about the virus or these mandates into the arms of the right wing, because they're the only ones that'll listen. Just like Tucker Carlson having Jimmy Dore or Glenn Greenwald. When the fuck would Rachel Maddow ever have Glenn Greenwald? Let me ask you that question. He was on Democracy Now! Again, which means they're getting better again. But, that's the whole point. You're pushing people into the arms of these people by not listening to them. And, of course, the far right will try to be opportunistic and astroturf and such. Just like the Democrats have astroturfed both Black Lives Matter and the Occupy movement, even though there's been no substantial change. I noticed there have been no police reforms under Biden or these Democratic mayors or governors really that were really substantial. So fuck the people, not literally because I wouldn't have sex with them, but the people that are pushing well, what about the convoy being funded by this group or that group? I don't give a flying fuck. The system needs to be torn down. The mandates need to stop. Trudeau needs to go, no matter who you are. I don't give a fuck if it was, if it was, even if it was a Nazi movement that was like an actual Nazi movement, which I doubt they are, pushing that shit. I'd be like, well, yeah, I hate Nazis, but fuck the mandates, fuck this system that they're trying to put in place, because that's what they're trying to do overall. I don't think they'll win, because we're going towards decentralization in our world, not centralization. They're just trying to kind of grasp onto the last dying remains of their incompetent grasp for power that they've had over the last 50 years. That's what they're trying to do with all this. That's about all. Peace out.